My husband and I were in an argument, and he shot me, and then he killed himself. I don't think I'm gonna make it.
And where did Jason him in his body? What did he do with Chris?
Where'd you stab him?
In his head, and in his chest, and in his neck, and in his stomach, and in his leg from when he kicked me. I stabbed him in his ass for all the times that he made me have sex, and I didn't want to, and I couldn't stop because he was gonna kill me, and I couldn't stop.
All marriages go through their rough patches, but no one expects common lovers' rows to end up in cold-blooded murder. Today, we're taking a look at Janel Boer, who snapped on Valentine's Day, murdered her husband, and painted him to be the perpetrator of the crime. And Susan Wright, who lured her husband into bed and stabbed him 193 times to make sure that he was really dead. Then we have the case of Kelly Cochran, who took the life of her husband after he murdered her lover. But is she really the scorned villain in this situation?
It's not enough, but it's what we had to do to get a resolution. Nothing is ever enough. Nothing will ever bring my son back. Nothing will ever erase the anguish we're all feeling from the loss of my son. Nothing can ever change what she has done.
Valentine's Day is the day to celebrate love. But what Janel Boer set out to do tainted the entire idea of the day for a lot of people. To the world, Janel and Greg Boer were the perfect couple. After their unsuccessful first marriages, both of them seemed to have found a true soulmate in each other. The couple also housed Greg's daughter Lily from his first marriage. And then there was Jason, their own son. Every morning, Janel set out to work at the local post office, and Greg would go to work at a pharmaceutical company a little later. The perfect modern family. Together, the couple earned enough to give themselves and their children a good life. The family lived on a 12-acre property in Scotts, Michigan.
He introduced us to her, and we were, okay, great. I'm happy that you're happy. But it didn't take long for us to see there was something off about her.
In what way?
She was very distant. She didn't really want the acceptance. She wanted Greg to herself.
They were so clingy and stuck to each other that it was kind of awkward sometimes.
Seemed like after they got married and after my grandson was born, things started changing pretty rapidly. She had managed to act like a different person up to a certain point, and then look out, here came the monster.
Greg and Janel had actually eloped in Las Vegas, which means that their marriage was quite a surprise to their families. According to Greg's mother, Janel had started to change once she had that ring on her finger. At first, she seemed like a sweet, innocent wife who loved Greg, but later on, things started to take a turn for the worse.
Lily, what do you want us to know about your dad?
He was such a good man.
So you didn't want Dad to marry her?
No, I didn't really like her that much at the time already because she just seemed super distant, and it was strange. It very soon became that she didn't want anything to do with me and ignored me most of the time.
That must have been hell.
Yeah, it was. She wouldn't look at me or speak to me or anything. She'd walk right past me and pretend I didn't exist.
Greg's daughter Lily also went on the record to talk about how Janel was also super distant from her. Lily believed that her stepmother didn't want anything to do with her and would just ignore her most of the time. She'd walk past me and pretend like I didn't exist, said Lily. So what was really going on? The truth is that Janel wasn't really what she showed herself to be. It was an open fact that she had an insane obsession with guns, and somehow she had roped Greg into it as well. The couple kept arms at their place and used their large property to practice their shooting, which is a really weird way for a couple to bond if you think about it. And, well, because Janel had access to these weapons, it was no surprise when she went off and used them to murder her husband in a fit of rage. On February 14th, 2017, Janel came home for lunch like every other day. However, when she found Greg to be home as well, the couple got into an argument. And, well, let's just say there was no coming back from this fight. After going back and forth for a while, Janel took out her gun and shot Greg then and there.
My husband and I were in an argument, and he shot me, and then he killed himself. I don't think I'm gonna make it. Oh my God.
She then made a tearful call to 911 and told the police that her husband had shot himself. The case was taken up by Kalamazoo County Sheriff, who sped through traffic with his team to get to the house in time to try and save Greg's life. However, when they got there, it was too late. When they got to the Boer household, Janel was outside, her arm injured and bloody. She painted as though her husband had tried to kill her before ending his life. So all sympathies started being channeled toward Janel at that point. She was loaded into an ambulance, and medical teams immediately started looking after her. When they went inside, the police came across dozens of guns inside the house, including all kinds of rifles and pistols, to the point where the Boer household actually looked like a small armory. The police then found Greg's dead body and a red pool, where Janel had claimed that her husband had fired at himself.
You know where you're going?
Valentine Hospital.
Okay. You know why?
Because I got shot.
What happened today?
I just came home on my lunch break. I've been trying to beg him to not get divorced. And he's got really mad, really angry with me because I had told my attorney, I showed them pictures of my husband had been abusing our son, and he'd been abusing me. He just started shitting like a whole bunch.
Meanwhile, the seemingly tragedy-stricken wife was being taken to a hospital. On the way, she talked to investigators and told them her version of the story. According to Janel, she had come home on her lunch break, and the couple had gotten into an argument about the state of their marriage. Janel claimed that she and Greg had been contemplating getting a divorce, but that day, she begged him to rethink the whole situation. Janel claimed that the argument had gotten Greg really mad because he knew that Janel had hired an attorney and showed them alleged pictures of Greg abusing their son. According to Janel, that is what had triggered him, and he started beating the house down. And well, let's just say that this killer's wife had the police in the palm of her hands because they were all believing whatever she had to say. However, when she was questioned again the next day, the authorities started to find some loopholes in her story. From her hospital bed, Janel gave her statement, which added to the story. According to her, she had slapped her husband across the head during their argument, and that's what drove him crazy enough to grab the gun and shoot at her.
Tell me your name, please, at the jail.
Janel Boer.
Thank you. All right, we're going to proceed and arraign your client at this time. Ms. Boer, can you hear me clearly over at the jail?
Yes, I can.
In Kalamazoo, state of Michigan, in count 1, that you committed the murder of Gregory Boer, contrary to state statute. This is a felony with a possible penalty of life imprisonment and DNA to be taken upon arrest. And you understand that is the charge that's being brought against you, as well as the possible penalty for the charge?
Yes, I do.
I slapped him across the head with my open hand, like that. He just went crazy. He grabbed the gun and shot at me.
How many times do you think?
At least 2, maybe 3. He said, "I'm gonna kill you for what you've done." And I assume that is for me telling my attorney and people that he abused our child. He abused me mentally, physically, and emotionally. And I kicked it, and it fell like off to the side.
You don't look like a karate master. Can you explain that?
I just kicked it with my foot.
When asked how many times he aimed the gun at her, she said that she couldn't remember correctly, but it was at least 1 or 2 times. According to Janel, Greg told her that he was going to kill her for exposing his abuse to her lawyers. Janel also said that when Greg grabbed the gun, she kicked it out of his hands, which seemed very unlikely considering her build. She then went on to claim that her husband grabbed a second gun and shot at her once again. Janel then went on to explain her husband's side of the story, which is what the police were really confused about.
My partner and I left the trauma room, and I turned to him and I said, that was my aha moment. She's trying to sell me this story.
According to Janel, Greg shot shot her and thought that he had killed her, which is why he then went ahead and took his own life as well. And while it did sound like it could have been the case, when Janel was done telling her story, she asked the detective to hug her. And that's where the authorities knew she was trying to sell them this story and gain sympathy for herself, so none of the evidence would be pointed her way. To the world, she would be the sad widow of a man who went crazy and killed himself, but not before shooting his doting wife on her bicep.
I was surprised right from the just asking basic biographical questions. Her calmness, her demeanor, it just struck me.
After all of this, the investigators went ahead and took another look at the situation, and it was then that they realized how the evidence was inconsistent with whatever Janel had been saying. What's even more strange is the fact that the murder happened right after Greg had filed for divorce, citing a breakdown of their marriage as the reason. He had also been living in a separate room in the house and asked for joint custody of their son. And all of these reasons led the police to believe that he couldn't possibly have been the perpetrator in this whole situation.
Only a single non-life-threatening flesh wound to Janel's bicep.
Not that he would have tried to kill her, but he was a very good shot. He would not have missed if he had tried to kill her.
According to Lily, her father had an excellent shot, so if he wanted to kill his wife, chances are that he would have. The detectives also found it strange how Greg could have missed Janel while only being a few feet away from her. And according to Janel, if she had passed out and started to bleed uncontrollably after getting shot, where was her pool of blood in the house?
How about him?
I think he was in the middle of the bed.
In the middle of the bed with both feet on the bed or one on one?
I think he had both feet in the middle of the bed. Like he me, killed me, and he took his own life. That's what it looked like to me. He must have thought, okay, I and killed my wife, so I'm gonna take myself out.
Janel had no injury to the back of her head, which immediately negated her story of falling to the ground after being shot. Greg, on the other hand, had been shot in the head, and it wasn't a wound that he could have given himself. Forensic experts were able to come to the conclusion that Greg hadn't shot himself, and the wound he had received had been delivered from 18 inches away, pointing all fingers at Janel. The final piece of the puzzle was found when the investigators checked Greg's hands for a gunshot residue and found that both he and Janel were found with the same trace amounts, which was negligible. And someone who had shot multiple rounds at someone like Janel claimed Greg did would have a lot more residue than this on their hands. And the only way that this story made sense was if the residue had been washed off after the crime was committed. But since Greg's body had been unwashed, the police easily came to the conclusion that Janel was the one who had committed the crime and then washed up the evidence afterward.
I can only hope that where you were going, you get all of the attention you crave and more. Greg was a man to whom family came first. He was my firstborn son and often my helper, both as a child and as a man. He was my son, my friend, my neighbor. By killing my son, you have torn the fabric of my entire family.
I will never forgive you for what you've done. You've shattered our lives, and most importantly, the lives of Greg's children. I only wish I could trade your worthless, selfish, pathetic life for Greg's. You've stolen a good father from his children. You have taken my big brother and one of my best friends. You do not deserve to bear my family's name.
However, what she didn't realize was that the authorities would also be examining the same evidence on Greg's body. With all this evidence, Janel was sentenced to 17 to 19 years in prison for taking away the life of an innocent man and a wonderful father. Since then, Janel and Greg's son Jason has been adopted by Greg's brother and his wife together. The couple has helped him and Lily come to terms with the trauma that they had to go through because of Janel's violence.
I was terrified. That is the only feeling that I felt, was that I was absolutely terrified.
And you were terrified that you were going to get caught for what you'd done.
No, I was terrified that he was going to keep trying to hurt me. No.
Susan Wright knew how to play the role of the perfect victim. To the world, she was a distraught widow who had taken some extreme measures to protect herself against her violent husband. But What we didn't know was that there was much more to the story than we thought. Susan, or the Blue-Eyed Butcher as the world knows her, met her husband, Jeff Wright, in 1997 while she was working as a waitress in Texas. In a true whirlwind romance, Susan was pregnant a few months later, and a year after they had met, the couple decided to get married before their son Bradley was born. A couple of years later, they had their daughter, Kaylee. And while everything seemed perfect at the start, Susan would later go on to claim that her husband was a substance addict who would abuse her and their kids in his fits of rage. However, it was a shocking twist in the story when it was revealed that Susan had been the abuser all along. In January 2003, Susan went haywire, tied her husband to their bed, and used 2 different knives to stab him over 190 times in an attempt to take his life in the most painful way possible. After the crime had been committed, Susan actually went on to paint the walls of their room to get rid of any evidence of murder.
That's a slice, isn't it?
No, I did not sit there and nick at him. I did not do that, no.
Where'd you stab him?
In his head, and in his chest, and in his neck, and in his stomach. And in his leg from when he kicked me. I stabbed him in his ass for all the times that he made me have sex, and I didn't want to, and I couldn't stop because he was gonna kill me and I couldn't stop.
The next day, she put on her victim's face and went to the police station to report a domestic abuse case against her husband. What's shocking is that she didn't tell the police that her husband was dead. Instead, she reported him missing and obtained a restraining order against him to explain his sudden disappearance from her life. However, what the police didn't know was that that same night, she had taken his body back to their backyard and buried him along with any evidence that might have incriminated her. However, she couldn't deal with the pressure of all the lies that she had told, and around 5 days after committing the crime, she called her attorney, Neil Davis, over to her house and confessed to her crime. She told him in detail about all that she had done, and as per his advice, Susan went on to turn herself in on January 24th. This kicked off her trial, where Susan pleaded not guilty. Susan went on to talk about her husband's alleged abuse and described the murder as an act of self-defense. In response to this, the prosecutor told their side of the story, claiming that Susan had seduced her husband to tie him to the bed, and after that, she had gone on to brutally murder him and hide his body. According to the prosecutor, the reason why she chose to do this was that she wanted to get her hands on Jeff's insurance money. However, Susan maintained her innocence, as her attorney portrayed her to be a battered victim of domestic violence who only killed her husband to protect herself and her children. When Susan took the stand, she talked about how her husband had done coke on the night that she murdered him. Susan said that she took his life in an attempt of self-defense because he had started beating her up after his binge. During the whole thing, Jeff had also hit their son a little too hard, which is when Susan decided that enough was enough. But instead of getting into an argument while Jeff's mental state was clearly not okay, she decided to act as if everything was okay. And when Jeff thought that his wife wasn't making a big deal out of his high, he relaxed and started to enjoy it. And when Susan asked him to join her in bed, he happily did so. As the couple started getting intimate with one another, Susan suggested that she tied Jeff to the bed, just to add another layer of excitement. Buzzing with a high, Jeff immediately agreed. However, once he was all tied up and restricted, Susan snapped. She started talking about how she had had enough of Jeff's abuse and that it was now time for payback. She took out the knife and cut Jeff right between his legs, where it hurts the most. She put him through an endless cycle of torture, giving him little cuts all over his body and then pouring hot wax over them. After 193 jabs, Jeff finally gave in to his injuries and passed out. She had then made a phone call to Jeff's family, setting up her story. She told them that Jeff was high and had stormed out of the house. She told his parents all about their son's substance abuse, and since this was the first time they were hearing any of it, they were shocked, to say the least. After this, Susan took care of Jeff's body and cleaned up the entire house to get rid of any evidence. This was the story that Susan told in court. However, the prosecutor wasn't buying it. He went on to claim that Susan's entire story was a lie, and she was trying to paint herself as a battered victim to escape the consequences of her actions. The lawyers believed that if this really was an act of self-defense, why had Susan gone to such extreme lengths to repaint her entire room, pour bleach over her bed and floors, and throw away any other evidence of the crime? Things just didn't seem to add up. She had told the same story to everyone after Jeff's mysterious disappearance, and only when the charade was getting too hard to keep up with did she fess up. When Susan took the stand, she explained that the reason she did all of this was that the murder had happened in the heat of the moment. She also went on to say that it was Jeff who had attacked her first with a knife, and what she did later was just an act of self-defense. However, when she was asked why she stabbed him so many times, Susan tearfully claimed that she was scared of him not dying and coming back to kill her. So she wanted to make sure the job was done.
If I wanted to do stab areas, stab movements to his penis, did you see anything consistent with a stab to the penis?
Not to the penis itself, no. There's a superficial cut. It's more of a slicing.
Superficial slicings like this.
This reenactment by the prosecutor became one of the most memorable moments of the trial.
The case was so perplexing that the prosecutors actually brought Susan and Jeff's actual bed into the courtroom and proceeded to reenact the entire night in order to come to some kind of conclusion. And let's just say it was a pretty disturbing sight to witness for anyone who was there. After 5.5 hours of back and forth, the jury came to a final decision, and Susan was convicted of murder a year after she had committed the crime. And while she tried to appeal her case, the conviction was upheld and she was denied parole in 2014 and then again in 2017. However, in 2020, she was let out under the condition that she went to therapy and was under constant supervision with a GPS monitor on her at all times. Susan's sentence is supposed to end in 2024. And let's just say that not too many people are happy about the decision considering what she is capable of. So, chances are that Susan probably won't be finding her Mr. Perfect anytime soon after she stabbed her previous one to death.
Tell me, what happened? What? Downsized him. How did he downsize him?
You need to know all that?
I do. I need to know it all. How did he him into pieces? A what? Like a big.
Known as the Devil Woman of Michigan, Kelly Cochran is one of the most notorious murderers history has ever seen. And while she's only ever been convicted of her own husband's death, people believe she might have plenty of other skeletons hanging in her closet. Born in Maryville, Indiana, Kelly and Jason were next-door neighbors and childhood sweethearts. They fell in love in 2002, and right after graduating high school, they decided to get married. And let's just say that their families were a little shocked at their decision. Not just because they were so young, but because their relationship had always been a little turbulent. But despite their violent fights, they somehow always managed to make up. What's weird is that the couple also made a pact on their wedding night to kill the other person's lover if they were ever caught cheating. And I mean, I don't know about you, but that's not the best way to start off your married life, is it? Anyway, life went on for the Cochrans, and the two worked hard to support their lifestyles. Sadly though, no matter how hard they worked, the debts just kept piling up. Jason worked all day servicing swimming pools. He would come back home exhausted every single day. And one day, his body just gave up, leaving Kelly to take over the household. So she decided that they needed a change and moved both of them to Michigan. Part of the reason why they did this was that marijuana was legal in the state and was the only thing that helped with Jason's back pain. Pretty sweet of Kelly to do, right? Now, in a shocking twist of events, when she got a job at a factory for naval ships, Kelly met 53-year-old Christopher Reagan, an Air Force veteran from Detroit. Soon enough, sparks started flying between the two, and Kelly had gotten herself involved in a full-blown affair. Despite their 20-year age difference, Kelly and Chris had a lot in common. They were both fun and outgoing and developed a great bond with one another that led to, well, other things.
Chris and I started dating exclusively. We had planned a future together.
So the next question is rather obvious.
Were you in love? Yes. And I truly believe Chris loved me.
But Terry says there was just one problem.
I think he had just two sides of him.
Terry says she discovered Chris's other side when she traveled overseas.
He decided that he was going to hook up with other women while I was in England. He told me that didn't mean anything. It was just nothing.
It was just
that had nothing to do with his love or our relationship. And I didn't understand that part.
However, not only was Kelly committed at the time, but Reagan was also involved with a woman called Terry O'Donnell in an on and off again situation. Sadly though, in October 2014, Reagan told Kelly that he was going to try to work things out with Terry and was going to spend Thanksgiving with her. And, well, that's all it took for Kelly to snap. No one heard from Christopher after that. He had made one final phone call to Terry, informing her of his visit, but there was radio silence after that conversation. What Christopher didn't know at that point was the fact that Jason had actually found out all about his wife's affair, and that the two had gotten into an explosive argument about it. But staying true to their wedding night pact, Jason had promised to forgive Kelly if she lured Chris into their home so that Jason could end his life then and there. So, the day when Chris was supposed to go back to Terry, Kelly called him over to be intimate with him one last time. And well, he agreed to it. He arrived at the Cochran house and the two had just started initiating their romance when all of a sudden Jason appeared out of nowhere with a rifle that he used to shoot his wife's lover down. According to the neighbors, they had heard a gunshot and then the sounds of a power tool that Jason had used to dismember Christopher's body. But little did he know that Kelly was only waiting for him to be done, as she made her own plans in her head. Years passed after the incident, but somehow, Kelly never really forgave her husband for the brutal murder of her lover. She bided her time and waited for the right moment to punish him for it. So while she helped Jason get rid of all the murder evidence back then, scattering remains of her lover's body in the woods by their house, she knew that one day, he was going to pay for it.
And where did Jason shoot him in his body? His head? The back? Front? Look at me. You watched him die. Right?
It was a breaking moment. Everything changes. She finally admitted it's not a missing person case. This is a murder.
What happened? What happened? How? What did he do with Chris?
The police were never really able to find Christopher's body or trace any evidence of his murder back to the Cochrans, so the case went cold. However, when they were questioned, Kelly did mention her affair with him, saying that her and Jason were in an open marriage. However, the police noticed that Jason was visibly upset about the entire situation. So while there wasn't any evidence to incriminate them, the police were definitely keeping watch. The story came to a close in February 2016 when Kelly frantically dialed 911 and reported that her husband wasn't breathing. When the responders arrived on the scene, Jason was found dead from what looked like an overdose. Kelly then went on to talk about her husband's dependency on substances to treat his chronic back pain, and the dependency is what had allegedly killed him. She also went on to talk about her husband's depression, saying that he might have just ended his life on purpose. So at this point, there was just a lot of mystery surrounding Jason's death. However, when an investigation was launched into the whole thing, sure, a huge amount of heroin had been found in Jason's system, but that wasn't the cause of his death. The coroner's reports showed that Jason had actually died of asphyxiation, which means that someone had him. And when Kelly was confronted with the evidence, she gave in and confessed to her crime. In an attempt to avenge her lover's death, Kelly had injected her husband with a huge dose of heroin. But when the process of his death was taking time, she took matters into her own hands and decided to smother him to death. What's absolutely terrifying is Kelly was ready to play the role of the battered wife, even holding a memorial service for Jason while telling people that losing him was the hardest thing she had ever done. And when the investigation was launched, Kelly actually abandoned her home and ran away, only keeping in touch with the investigators through her phone to keep herself from looking suspicious. However, by then, it was too late and the police had already tracked her phone to go and arrest her. Kelly would then reveal that Christopher's murder had also been deliberate on her part because she had only told Jason about the affair when Christopher expressed that he wanted to leave Kelly and make it work with Terry. So it was a diabolical move on Kelly's part to ensure that her lover would die than be with someone who wasn't her. So then why did she decide to kill Jason? Well, according to Kelly, the murder had strangely affected her, so she decided the only way for her to even the score was to kill Jason. And she didn't stop there. Kelly also went on to claim that she had killed up to 9 other people and buried their bodies in the same way. And while evidence of that is still yet to be found, there is no denying the fact that Kelly Cochran is a wife straight out of a nightmare.